If Angelina's son Percy is at the stage of asking why questions and expecting that Angelina and Alex will know everything, my kids, all three of them, are at the stage of not asking me any questions because they think they know everything. Ben's back there. I can feel the look from here. They're good kids. I love them. They actually know a lot and often know things I don't know. But when I was pregnant, long before they were thinking they knew everything or asking me why questions, when I was pregnant with my first child, Sam, I was not at all sure that my pregnancy would not result in a miscarriage. Many of you have heard this story or some of my story about infertility and miscarriage, but some of you have not. Before the birth of Sam, my oldest, I had 2 miscarriages and struggled with infertility. I was not attending church at that point in my life and had little knowledge of God and even less knowledge of Jesus. I prayed, but only in the most general of terms. And at that time in my life, my prayers ran something like this: why are you doing this to me? And please, please, please let this child be born. At the time, my mother worked for a woman whose father was a pastor. How's that for a great game of telephone for you? My mother's boss's father. He was a Baptist pastor in Southern California, and I was an agnostic woman living in Olympia, Washington. He knew about my story through this chain of connection, me to my mom's boss, to her father, the pastor. And through this chain of connection, when he learned that I was once again pregnant, he asked if he could pray for me. I honestly didn't really believe it would matter much at all one way or the other, but said yes because I was desperate and figured prayer wouldn't hurt, even if it didn't help. 23 years later, I stand here telling you this story as that child I was carrying is getting ready to graduate from college in June. During that whole pregnancy, my mom would report to me that the Baptist pastor would find himself praying for me at all times of the day. He would wake up in the middle of the night and pray. He went about his daily routine and would find my pregnancy on his heart, and he would pray. He lifted up my prayer concern to his congregation at church on Sundays. I never met him, and he never laid eyes on the child he so faithfully prayed over. I can't tell you that Sam was born because of those prayers. I just don't know. The birth of my son Sam and God's role in it raises more questions than answers for me. I had other miscarriages after Sam and another child, Ben, who's in the back, born, so there is almost nothing I can say for sure except this. Those prayers held me throughout the worry and anxiety of that pregnancy. They made a difference, if only to my well-being, and to this day, I have trouble recalling the love and generosity that was embodied through those prayers without tearing up. When that pastor offered to pray for me and he didn't ask about my faith or beliefs, it meant something profound to me. Those prayers were not dependent on whether or not I thought God could or would work in my life. And while he did respectfully ask me if he could pray for me, his prayers were completely grounded in his faith, not mine. Our story today of Jesus raising Lazarus is as mysterious as the prayers that surrounded me during my pregnancy and raised just as many questions for me. We see that Jesus' role in the story is shrouded in questions, many of them voiced by Martha and Mary. Why did Jesus wait to come? Why does he grieve Lazarus' death when he is just going to raise him? Why does he say that Lazarus is sleeping when he is really dead? Does Martha actually believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God? Does her belief matter to the raising of Lazarus from the dead? What does resurrection mean? When will it happen? Who is Jesus? As a pastor, and I think I share this in common with lawyers, which maybe isn't a good thing to admit, I rarely like to raise questions that I cannot answer. Answers provide comfort and reassurance, and they feel pastoral. But Martha's questions in this story that Jesus rarely answers directly are a reminder that we live in the messiness of life, where issues of life and death and faith and miracles and belief are rarely concrete and etched in stone. There is a tradition in the Jewish faith of wrestling with holy texts, which is inherent actually in the name of the Jewish people, Israel, which means literally wrestles with God. It is in this wrestling that the holiness of the text takes hold of us and begins to live and breathe for us. What we see here, what we have seen from the beginning of the sermon series, both in our practice of questioning and the texts themselves, is a wrestling. If you remember back to the very beginning of Lent, the snake asks, "Will you really die if you eat of the fruit?" We might read this to mean, what is the nature of death that God warns against? And then we found Nicodemus. What does it mean to be born from above? Or the Samaritan woman. Do you, Jesus, consider yourself greater than our ancestor Jacob? And then when she says, he can't be the Messiah, can he? Or last week, the question, who sinned, the blind man or his parents? All of these questions are faith questions. People trying to wrestle with Jesus, his message, what they have been taught, and the real life circumstances that might challenge their faith. Our story today is no different. Martha questions Jesus from the very beginning. She might use declarative sentences, but she is inviting a response from Jesus, challenging him to explain himself. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that God will do anything you ask him. Can't you almost hear Martha's challenge here? Jesus, can you save him? Can you raise him? Could you have cured him? Will you cure him? And then Jesus, your brother will raise from the dead. It's an answer, but an answer that doesn't get to the why or the how, some of the very things that Martha is probing. Martha responds then with another declarative statement. I know he will rise from the dead on the last day. Again, Martha is offering a challenge to Jesus. She is saying, I know the teachings of our faith about resurrection at the end of time, but is that really all you have to offer me? And then we get the declarative sentence from Jesus that reveals to Martha and to anyone who is listening who Jesus is. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though they will die, will live. Do you believe this? Out of Martha's questioning, her challenges, we get one of the clearest declarations of Jesus' identity. It is an I am statement tracking back to God's I am statement in Exodus when Moses questions who is sending Moses to the Israelites to free them from Pharaoh. In this story, the I am statement from Jesus is declaring that he will set anyone who believes free from death, a foreshadowing of both the raising of Lazarus and the resurrection of Jesus we'll celebrate on Easter Sunday. This cannot be undervalued. Out of Martha's questions emerges the revelation of Jesus as the one who will bring resurrection. When we are tempted to think that our questions are unacceptable to God, that what God asks of us is blind devotion without giving voice to our wonderings, our questions, our doubts, let us return to Scripture again and again, where Martha's wrestling with Jesus prompt the revelation. Jesus then will return the questioning to Martha, asking her, do you believe this of me? Martha responds with perhaps the most definitive Christological affirmation in all of the Gospels. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Just as a side note, I can't help it, I'm a woman pastor. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Peter is the one who makes this affirmation of Jesus, identifying him as the Christ. And here we find this declaration in the mouth of a woman. Following the Samaritan, that's right, woohoo! Following the Samaritan woman at the well who introduced the idea in John chapter 4 by asking, he isn't the Messiah, is he? So if you ever hear somebody say women can't preach, turn to John and open up and look at these women who preach in this gospel. Martha, no longer questioning, declares that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the one the people have long awaited. Rather than sowing seeds of doubt in her faith, her challenges and questioning leads her to this affirmation. Questioning our faith has the potential and power to lead us closer to God. We have seen this over and over again in the last few weeks. First Nicodemus, then the Samaritan woman at the well, the blind man from last week, and now Martha. All of these people wonder about Jesus and ask him questions and then make a faith decision of some kind. Nicodemus, if you remember, walks away after the questioning, but we know he comes back after Jesus' death to bury Jesus' body, an act of devotion. The woman at the well, after her piercing theological debate with Jesus, ends up saying, he might be the Messiah, the one we're waiting for. The blind man, questioned by the Pharisees, says at first that Jesus is a prophet, but as the Pharisees continue to question him, he finally says, this man comes from God. And today, Martha, asking Jesus why he waited to come attend to her brother, pronounces that Jesus is the Son of God. What if we allowed our questions to be a normal part of our faith conversation? What if we allowed ourselves to sometimes say, I don't know all of the answers about Jesus, but here is what I do know. And then continue to ask open-ended and open-hearted questions to see where they might lead. I don't always like faith questions, especially when I don't have the answers. I want to offer assurance, certainty, and unwavering conviction. But the truth is that none of us holds all the answers about God. It is impossible, if God is truly transcendent and rises above us and our human knowledge, that any of us could understand everything there is to know about God. So questions, the act of saying to God, I wonder, or how, or why, is actually a profound confession of faith. It is humbling ourselves before the one who is greater than us. When that preacher prayed for me so many years ago, I did not know if it would make any difference at all. At the very least, I didn't want to make God angry by turning down prayer. I now know that now know God a bit better than I did back then, and I understand that God would not have been angry with me if I had declined that offer. I said yes to those prayers and entered into a mystery I still don't fully comprehend today. But here is what I do know. Those prayers were a constant source of comfort to me. I didn't need to understand them for them to be a tangible comfort in times of desperation and anxiety. Those prayers were an act of love that held me through a difficult and frightening time in my life. Those prayers were an invitation that I wasn't ready to answer, but someday would. Those prayers were with me in the delivery room when I held my newborn baby boy for the first time, and those prayers have walked with me every step of my faith journey since then. Those prayers were not dependent on my unwavering proclamation of certainty regarding God. Those prayers were a gift given to me by a person of faith and by God. Those prayers eventually were a part of what led me to church, to God, and to Jesus, but not because I understood everything about exactly how they worked. They led me to God because they were real for me, even when I did not yet believe. Martha, who proclaims, "You are the Son of God," just a few short moments later, as they approach Lazarus' tomb, says, "Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell. You are the Son of God, the Messiah, and yet I'm not sure you will be able to overcome the ravages of death." She believes and she doubts in the same breath. Yes, please pray for me. What will it really matter anyway? There is so much good news in this story. It's about a man raised from the dead. But perhaps in the miracle, we might lose track of this good news. The miracle of resurrection was not dependent on Martha's unwavering faith or her ability to understand what it means that Jesus is the Son of God. The miracle happens even as Martha is wondering if it can. I want us to sit with that for just a moment. The miracle happens even while Martha is wondering if it can. Our doubts, wondering, questions do not stop God from working in the world or even in our own lives. When we let go of the need to be certain, suddenly so much opens up to us. We can be in conversation, relationship even with the God we know in Jesus while we still wonder. Maybe there's actually no other way. So as we sit with this resurrection story and as we move towards Easter and the resurrection of Jesus, as we venture into the Eastertide season after Easter, where we begin to explore what resurrection might look like in our own lives, let us go with a sense of wonder, hope, doubt, faith, trust, and disbelief. God will meet us where we are and work, even as we wonder if that is even possible. Amen.